So, good evening, dear guests, our speakers, organizers, and a very warm welcome to this discussion, this event tonight. Firstly, thank you all for being here with us, because it's truly wonderful to see everyone here with a smile and all the love for textile here. And yeah, why are we here tonight? To explore a meaningful space where art, therapy, activism all merge together through the medium of textile, stitching, mending, embroidery, so practices that might seem like quiet and gentle, but in fact carry enormous depth. So my name is Jaša, and I'm a radio host at the public radio station, and tonight I'll be moderating this great discussion, and it's a great honor because, let's say, textile is not my expertise, but I'm here to learn as well. So I'm very glad that I have these great ladies in the front row that will help us to understand more. Yeah, so I think that without further ado, we can say here is our Zala Otto. She's artistic director and founder of this year's WellBIEN 2025. And yeah, you can say a few words if you want to.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Short, yes. Just a minute, please. My daughter again. You met her. 2 years ago, Jasmina Pacek approached me with this really nice idea of making videos of good practices, international good practices, so that we see what is happening outside of the state. And this is how I met Savneet, and then later I met Jasmina and also Pamela. Thanks for being with Savneet. It was like we met before. It was just so natural, and then whenever we had a chance to speak, it was just very quick conversation about topics that they were really so important. The thing what I realized is that Slovenia also has a very, very strong and powerful communities, and that we're such a good practice as well. So thank you, Jasmina, that you're showing this to us and to everybody, and that you're promoting and developing the field. And thank you that I can do it with you. So without further ado, Jasmina Pacek, please.
Okay. I will mix Slovene and English, and Zala will also help me to translate some parts. So how Zara introduced me, as I'm coming from the field of textile. I'm a textile designer and artist. I'm working in the collective, Olu. So I'm artist for like 30 years, but last 10 years I'm also including textile art and health, mixing together and making space, very like welcome space for immigrant women. So we are doing together very beautiful but also supportive project with, firstly I started with Bosnian women, and then later I work with women from Syria, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and so on. So me and my colleagues from Olu, Jaša and Katja Burger-Kovic, we work with, our life becomes very interconnected and intercultural. So after 10 years, we have a lot of foreigner friends, and and we are very happy to live such a life. 2 years ago, we opened the space for textile communities which are alive in Slovenia, and offer communication also about practices from United States, from UK, mostly these parts of Europe and United States. But today we are alive here. I'm very happy that we can really communicate with each other. What I wanted to say, thank you, Zala, because you make this space also for well-being and health. Because my wish now for 3 years is to enter the galleries and museums and to visit them are you ready to invite art therapists and artists who are working in health field, art and health field, that we work with your communities in this topic? So I invite people to gallery, but I use art like a window into our inner side. So I show the people work or two or a little gallery, and then we start to somehow to think about ourselves and how this art, what is this art is telling to us, and discover actually it becomes self-discovery journey. What I wanted to create here is actually self-care space, because last year I hear so much stories about women who are who don't know how to stop, but they feel they have to stop because they are like people who are working in pedagogic field, people who are working in social field, people who are women who are working in therapy field. So we know how to care about others, but not so much we don't know how to care about ourselves. And I asked Adala, can we make a space for people who are actually in the field of help in the profession of health, of therapy, of health. So we actually create at the beginning the field for us somehow to get nurtured, to slow down, to hear our voices, and to somehow to connect in this little community. But here I will stop because I decided actually to go further just with one poem. I write a poem about stopping because for me, when women ask me how to stop, how to actually come out of this mother, teacher, I don't know, partner role, I just become silent. I don't know also for myself. So here is a poem. I will write it in Slovene and then I translate it in English. So I call it pesem upora. Ustavimo se skupaj. Naj nas nit in igla nežno povežeta s svojo mehkobo, trdnostjo in prisotnostjo. Naj nas nit in igla naučita ljubeče prijateljevati s sabo. Ker okolja, ki so v svoji srži nespoštljiva do naših teles, potreb, počitka in intimne ustvarjalnosti, prinašajo življenje brez radosti, ki je suho in trdo. Ustaviti se je revolucionarno dejanje. Pri tem rabimo drugo, da si damo dovoljenje in da damo dovoljenje tudi ostalim. V odpočitih telesih lahko zaslišimo bitje svojega srca in spet vemo, kdo smo. Iz negovalne drže zagledamo več možnosti, poti in korakov, kako se ustaviti in ustaviti in ustaviti. Čeprav svet trdi drugače. Zato ustavimo se skupaj. Tako da v tem trenutku vas v bistvu vabim v ta prostor, ki ga bomo držali te 3 dni. Vabim, da tukaj poiščete intimen trenutek lastne ustavitve. To je obenem globoko osebno in brutalno politično dejanje. And now I will translate in English. Song of resistance. Let us stop together. May the thread and needle gently connect us with their softness, strength, and presence. May the thread and needle teach us how to befriend ourselves with love. Because environments that at their core disregard our bodies, our needs, our rest, and our intimate creativity bring forth a life without joy, drive, and heart. To stop is a revolutionary act. We need one another in this, to give ourselves permission and to give permission to others as well. In rested bodies, we can hear the breathing of our hearts and once again remember who we are. From a space of care, we can see more possibilities, paths, and steps. How to step and how to stop and stop and stop again. Even when the world insists otherwise. So let us stop together. So that's it. And here, in these 3 days of our well-being program, intimate moment of home stopping. It is both a deeply personal and a political act. So, thank you.
Jasmina is a great example of how you can combine many arts together, also with poetry. So I think that was really beautiful. Maybe let's just briefly go through the schedule this evening. We're gonna first have presentations of our 3 incredible women here that flew all over the world to Slovenia to present their work. And then I'll have maybe a few questions. I know that Pamela doesn't want like a lot of questions, but we'll try to make it short. And then after that, we're gonna have our roundtable or debate, however you want to call it. You can ask them questions, and if you can, maybe feel free to ask those questions also in between. But if you can, maybe wait until the evening. There is going to be a debate. Maybe let's just start with our first speaker, Jasmina Pacek. Jasmina is a Croatian artist and art therapist working between clinical, educational, and community-based settings. She also teaches at the Academy of Arts and Culture in Osijek, a small town in Croatia, and her work focuses on how textile practices like sewing, weaving, and embroidery can support trauma recovery. So we're going from within ourselves. With each and every one of the speakers, we're going more to outside, to activism. But this one is going to be very intimate. In Jasmina's sessions, people use their practices not just to make something with their hands, but to process emotions and tell their stories that are sometimes, or quite often, very difficult ones. So, without further ado, Jasmina.
Hello everyone, thank you for a lovely introduction. Talking about narrative textiles is something that's really important in terms of processing trauma, in terms of culture and connection, and this is what my presentation is going to be based today. The article that most of the kind of the theoretical framework that I want to just touch base on is based on Lisa Ray Garlock from George Washington University, who is our visiting professor, who comes to Croatia and teaches in our program. The program that we have in Croatia, we teach it in Zagreb. It's based Academy of Arts and Culture in Osijek, together with the School of Medicine. And we teach the program that has drama therapy, music therapy, dance movement therapy, and visual arts. So it's kind of the closest one to Slovenia, where you can actually study the program. But to go back to the basics of the narrative textiles, what's really important to understand in terms of what we were seeing here yesterday in the opening of the exhibit, when we think about textiles in terms of fine art, to think about in therapeutical terms, textiles in terms of culture, time and purpose. And when we talk about narrative textiles, and this is not moving, help. Okay, maybe now, okay. So the themes that we usually see in narrative textiles can start from stories and mythology. They can be current events, can be political or any other current events, or very personal experiences. And those are the general aspects of where we see the narrative textiles. The terms that we use, narrative textiles, you will see in the literature, it can be story cloth, memory cloth, Spanish words for it, pripovedno platno, in Hrvatski, Slovenski, pripovedno platno, because we are telling the story. With the fabric, with the item, we're actually trying to give a voice to somebody who is creating it. So giving the voice is something that we think about. If it's trauma, that we are giving back the voice, if the voice has been taken from us through the traumatic event. So it can be in terms of stitching our lives back together, supporting each other, healing trauma, but it's all usually about something that it's very hard to talk about. And this way we're actually creating something to create this channel of communication with the world outside from us. We know historically that sewing has been something that people have done, women in general, from the historical time. It's time where we get together, we spend time together, we process it. But I love this, this quote, and it says, "The needle stabs as it creates, forcing the thread and the yarn into the action of creation," because it gives the power to the women who are creating it. And that's something that's really powerful about using this kind of tool rather than anything else in general. And it's not individual act, and it's something that we do in community, something that the community gives us validation, gives us support, gives us connection. And it's usually the antidote from isolation, from shame and fear, and that's something that we usually, feel when there is a traumatic event, if it's personal or if it's a community-based. When we think about emotions that we can sew, because through the cloth, through the fabric, we can express any kind of emotion, if it's a fear or joy or sorrow, but then the time that it takes to sew something, it's actually the time that allows you to heal, because if you're using any kind of painting media, you can be splashing paint really quickly. You can be doing something with clay or with any other material. It can be done really fast. With the fabric, it takes time, and that's something that, in our case, in this case, in processing of trauma, it's very, very helpful. So when we think in terms of historical background, fabrics have always been used for expression of identity, for social status, for secrets, stories. It's not something new. We are touching on it now from perspective of art therapy, but we are not discovering something that's never been done before. We're just naming it in today's environment, because there is no society that doesn't have textiles. Anywhere in the world, we look at different, historical heritage through the fabrics. I love when I'm traveling all over the world. It's my favorite thing to do, and buy fabrics, finding the fabrics, because the stories in there that, something that we can communicate. And even here, when we look at the contemporary work, it's something, when we look at the contemporary exhibits here, then we're looking at the fabric in a different way, as a personal expression in one way. But then from the traditional points also, quilts and blankets, it's something that it's been done in a way that it's not just the community, but it's the pieces of fabric that somebody brings to the table, individual stories that you bring something from your grandmother, your heritage piece, something, it's a piece of garment, a piece of bedding, linens, or something that you inherited, and you try to combine it together. And it can be very powerful. So this conversation started about a decade ago in terms of the community and public speaking. The first Sew and Speak conference was held in 2014 in Geneva, when they start talking about what's happening around the world, in different parts of the world, who is doing what kind of projects are being done, and trying to come up with more kind of the public platform where we can communicate more about it. And the Common Threads project was one of them. And I know somebody in the audience is going to love this picture, where we can see the project of Common Threads project that's being done in a model of working with survivors on gender-based violence. And it's the project where you can, the idea was that people would go in and not work directly with the survivors of trauma, because there'll be a huge cultural difference from somebody. Let's say I come and teach to a completely different part of the world, but you come in and you train the trainers, and that way you're giving them support in terms of psychoeducation, sensory motor awareness, therapeutic art, story cloth, and then you basically train the trainers in the community where the specific situation is happening, and then you're allowing local people then to work with the community that is having any kind of problem. Okay, just jumping out. So anything that we do with that kind of processing, it can be numbing depression, it can be, going through the anxiety, trauma-related stress, but basically what we are trying to do is trying to get people from being stuck in the past where, you know, the trauma happened and bringing them into here and now and, you know, getting the healthy and life, you know, affirming lifestyle. Because anything that happened in the past, and we know with art therapy in general, that trauma is, is held in a nonverbal part of the brain. So using any kind of visual imagery is helping us bring the trauma out and process it in a particular way. So, you know, creating story cloth can be one of those way of doing it. So anything like that, creating those story cloth, you know, working with survivors, using the participants, creating the environment where they can work together, create a safe space where they can communicate that. And then there is a choice if they want to exhibit it, they want to show it, and, you know, how they want to provide their input to the public or not, or keep it very personal. That's something that, because we don't create pieces for the exhibit. Like yesterday we were walking around, we were, you know, seeing the pieces, artists are freely talking about everything they created. With personal, with art therapy textile, with story cloth, it's very personal, and then people really at the end of the process decide, is that something they want to share with the world or not. One of the themes that usually is very common to be given to participants is the day I will never forget. And it's kind of very general in terms of, because it can be anything. And usually, you know, we never tell clients, oh, go for your worst trauma, go for your something that's really bad. But usually that's what happens, because people very frequently just go to those really most difficult days or difficult times in, you know, in their lives. So something like that is what, you know, you would expect. So in art therapy, it's really used all over the world. The textiles is being used more and more. And one of the things with the textile is it's the material that is easily accessible everywhere in the world, because with art therapy, and I don't know how many of you in the audience, you know, are art therapists, we talk about the materials that are more like crayons and markers and pencils and collage paper and all this, you know, something that comes with living in Western society and having all those, you know, easily accessible things that kids in our schools in Western societies would use. But then you go into different societies where those are just not available, and fabric is always available. So, you know, thinking something about in terms of culture in Africa, same in India, if you go and the fabric's accessible, and then also if you're working especially with the female population, it's something that they're ready easily, you know, something that they would want to use, rather than going back and thinking, oh, the crayons is something that it's for kids, and they don't think it's an adult media. When you work with textile, female women will actually relate easier to, you know, to that media. The project that was done here in Slovenia and Bosnia at the end of the Civil War was also using textile media, because it's something the embroidery technique was used very much so. But to understand why we actually do it, it's also important to have the neurological side of it. How does our brain works, and why is that really important, and how the sewing helps us in a different way than maybe painting or doing a different type of activity. So one of the models, this famous 5R, is that when we do any kind of textile work, we're doing something that has, the activities have the relational, repetitive, relevant, rewarding, and rhythmic activities to it. And we look at one at a time and think about it. So relational, it means that we relate to each other. It's not something that is done in isolation. So people, you know, the group is supporting, like, you know, I mentioned before. So it's creating that supporting environment, the understanding, identifying with one another, because I might feel, you know, not strong enough to be able to say any of my traumas, but maybe somebody else in the group will say it. So I'll process it through their words, through what's something that somebody, you know, something else will come. So it will be relational. It will be relating to something that's happening with somebody else, and that really, you know, helps a lot. The second aspect is repetitive. Everything we do with textiles, it includes repetition. It's either the sewing, if you're knitting, if you're crocheting, if you're weaving on the loom, on the frame, there is a repetition to it. And, you know, even the cutting, everything, you know, you have to do it many, many, many times. And our brain likes repetition. It gives us safety. It gives us a safe space. So, and it's also, we always use both hands when we do something with textiles. We can't do like, you know, we can draw with one hand, but we cannot sew. At least, you know, you have to hold on something. And that's also a bilateral process. And it helps our, you know, brain crossing the midline every time when we do that. So that's also very, very helpful. In terms of relevance, thinking about being relevant in terms of creating something that's developmentally age appropriate, because the textile media is something that you can give it to little kids. They can play with wool, they can be just throwing it around, they can use the tactile media, or they can start using some of the techniques because it's helping them develop their fine motor skills. So it's really good to think about any possible age group, even the teenagers who are don't want to do something that is repetitive and slow. But if you can get teenagers to engage in activity like that, it's very wonderful for them, and it will slow them down and help them also in every aspect. So in every developmental age, we can create some kind of activity that's based on textile that that can be very, very helpful. Rewarding aspect is when it comes to all these other elements that textile media does have, which is the sensory pleasure. Because when we work with paper, there's not that much of the sensory aspect, and we use the sensory rooms with neurodivergent, population, anything like if we work with autistic clients, but even with the healthy population, just touching the silk, touching the fur, touching all different, like now when we go through the exhibits, like Paula and myself are going today, we're touching everything with nobody's looking, and it's something that we feel like it should be encouraged, that when you go to a textile exhibit that you're allowed to touch, because it's part of the feedback that the textile is such a strong media that gives us that touch, and it gives us feedback on a sensory level, and then it goes into the cognition as well, and then it gives us these different aspects of us as a maker. And then the last aspect is the rhythmic, because that repetition gives us the rhythm. And the rhythm is through our, the heartbeat and everything that we do. It creates a specific rhythm. It slows us down in terms of, creating the vibration for ourselves, but then also through, within the group. Even just moving around the room, if you're setting up the tables, if you're creating, if you're finding the objects, if you, picking your walls and fabrics and everything. And it's also the other meta rhythm when you are just kind of talking a lot, and then all of a sudden the room goes quiet and nobody's talking and everybody's just in their work, and then all of a sudden people start to talk again, ask questions, start to relate with stories, and that becomes really, really powerful, because that creates another level of the rhythm, which is not just our individual by our hands and our biorhythm, but also the group itself. So there are a lot of researches in terms of how textiles changes the mood, and not just in short term, in terms of like, oh, now I'm in a group and now I feel better this particular hour or this particular evening, but also like in the long term, like, being engaged in textile activities, how much it changes, and it does, So that's something that's really, really powerful. So when the activities that I will be working on with my workshop that I will be running Monday through Wednesday, we will be creating the family story cloud that each participant will choose. A team within the family. These are the most common, and this is the one, like I mentioned, the day of the time, the day I will never forget, because it can include anything in particular. And when we do that, it can be a story of grief and loss. It can be a journey of any kind. It can be a triumph. It can be a metaphor. It can be any kind of event that's personal or political. So I'll show you some examples of different story cloths that you can see how those can be really, really powerful. So this first example is very political. It's an example from Chile, and it shows, if you look at the image itself, it actually has the very figurative images of the humans, the figures in uniforms and civilians, and you can actually see the fighting. And it was done through the military dictatorship at the time, when people were not allowed to talk about it. And it was really powerful media, because the women started to sew these images, create little stories, like, creating what really happened, because you're not allowed to say it. And those stories, the actual narrative fabrics were smuggled across the borders, and they basically helped to voice the concern and to actually tell what was happening in the country, and actually did help to eventually bring the justice and change the government in Chile at the time. So it became really, because the media was not allowed, there was no verbal media that was creating, so like the very old-fashioned piece of fabric actually told the story and helped in a change like that. Second example is very different. It's from one of my students who allow us to use his work. he was telling a story about the suicide of his grandfather. And he enrolled into the program as a mature student. And he talked about his grandfather, who was living in a small village, was no education, and complained through his life, like at that kind of later part of the life, he felt he had cancer, and he complained about the pain. And the pain was so strong, and they started taking him to the hospitals, and all the health tests came negative, so he was not physically ill. But he kept saying that he was in pain. And at the end, he actually did committed suicide. And he threw himself into the family well, into the backyard. So my student, who was 12 at the time, when later became an art therapist, he was reflecting back and thinking about this whole time through his childhood, how he basically was really angry and sad, and he was holding grudge against his parents. Why didn't they help him more? Why didn't nobody took him to to a psychiatrist, to a psychologist, to see if there's something else going on? And he basically felt this anger through this whole time. And like many years later now, he felt that he needed to process it somehow, because in his mind, his grandfather was still stuck in the well, inside, in the deep dark. And because he's not a religious person, he's an atheist, and he was thinking like, there's nothing else for him, and he's just stuck in there. And it's something like, one of the trauma, of the childhood trauma that really, was also not just in terms of the grandfather who is not with him, but also making it really difficult for him to have a relationship with his father, because that's the person who he felt should have taken care of his father, the father of the father. So what he did in this piece of textile, he managed to create this image of his grandfather is on the ladder, and he is making a path for him going into the sun, into the paradise, and using in his words, thinking, because he said I'm an atheist, but recognizable, it's an archetype for him, and he's freeing his grandfather, and the images on the left and the right side of the ladder is his father and his aunt, so the children of the deceased man. So the grandfather is smiling, he's forgiving them for the fact that they didn't understand his pain and what he was going through, and they're waving goodbye to him. So everybody's kind of liberating through that story. And so he felt that through this image that he managed to free not just the grandfather, but himself as a boy who struggled and managed to, to kind of get into that space for himself. But then the final part of that was he was doing the piece, and then he felt, I should give it to my mother to do the sewing on the sewing machine, just the edge of it. And basically creating the reason to tell the story to the family, because it was an intimate project. It was part of the school assignment. It was part of something, for the class. So he gave it to his mother just to sew the edge, and then started the family conversation. And then the sister got involved, and then finally the father. And they basically used this piece of textile as the medium to sit around the family table and talk about it. And then they talked about the funny parts and how they had good time in the village with the animals and everything. And they felt not everything was just based on that one moment at the end. And it was the moment when the family basically came together many years after and felt that everybody did the best they could. They didn't know any better. They took him to the doctors they felt that they should, and how many years later they can talk about it and feel more free. So I felt that was really powerful example. And the third example is also from one of my students, very different, much, very light in comparison with the previous one. There was a story of her grandmother when she told her that every time if she had to go and buy groceries, she wouldn't take her little kid with her. And I know today, in today's world, that will be punished. They will take your child away if you leave the little kids at home by themselves. But in the old times, she would put a white napkin on the floor and put some toys, and the little girl, my student's mother, would sit on this white napkin, and it would be like a safe space, and she was not allowed to move from that white napkin, because that's where she was supposed to sit and play. So the grandmother would go buy groceries and come back, and the mother would still sit on the white napkin. So, and that's it, and that's the end of the story. So the way my student told the story was because her grandmother put it in the context, well, that was your mother, but if it was you, my granddaughter, who knows where I would find you? Comparing like today's growing up and how the kids are more free and how, it's difficult to raise kids, and then we talk about different generation and everything. So for my student, first, it was like almost like an insult. Oh, she thought, she thinks I'm naughty and my mother was a good kid and I'm a bad kid. But then it kind of opened up the whole conversation of different generation of women, and then she started to think about her grandmother, her mother, herself, and her daughter at the time. And then she started creating these layers on the piece of fabric, and basically creating different aspects of it. And at the time when she was sewing it, she had this young daughter, and the daughter came and saw it, and she thought she was making her. And and she wasn't making her daughter, she was making her mother. But it's just kind of how transgenerational stories are being told, and how we all reflect, and how we all find our place when we want to see it. And it's something that really, for my student, it was a memory of her grandmother who had passed away, but then also encouraging her to think about all the generation of women and how they can tell these stories. So those are the examples that I wanted to show you, and the participants in my class, I will be showing more different examples. So basically, to conclude, about the textiles in working with fabrics, it's about confronting and in a meaningful way, and this using the traditions in something like that, and then creating these lasting pictures, because you have this piece that can stay with you. And something with the story cloth, it's easy. You can fold it, you can take it with you. With big installations we create here, we need an exhibit space. We need to leave it hanging. We need to have a separate, setup. We need lights. With something like this, it's something very portable. You can take with you. It's very personal. And this third aspect, stretching the boundaries of the art material, is like what kind of material we use. And we just had the discussion with Pamela today of how we think about the fabrics, something that can be used in terms of the crayons and pencils and everything else that we buy, and then also the embodied emotions. So this was kind of the first portion of the presentation I was going to stop at. And then when Jasmina gave me the context of this well-being way was designed in nature here, I was thinking that on the last day with my participants, instead of just having the piece of fabric that we create, that we would take it outdoors into the nature and combine elements of creating the fabrics and the story cloth with the nature-based art therapy. So there's a lot, in a recent talk, this is just a scoping review that came in 2025, I was part of the group that's researching, exploring nature-based art therapy in terms of how much of that is being done recently, and it's a huge research that's being done. And just to touch quickly on that nature-based art therapy is basically combining the therapeutic potential of the nature. So we use the elements of art therapy with ecology, and we think about the human in a holistic way, how we don't separate ourselves from nature. And we practice that with our students and our clients. This is one of the locations where our students can go for clinical practice. It's a psychiatric hospital at the island of Rab at the Adriatic coast. And it's in this beautiful setup on, by the sea with lavender fields. And when our students work there and they run workshops, they have this, set up in therapeutic parks, and they work in terms of art S therapy versus art psychotherapy, and then combine both depending on the size of the group and the setting that you have. So these are kind of the images of those locations. And then being here in Kranj is kind of reminding me that especially today we had a little introduction with the botanical garden here in the city, where we can be finding the safe place to to exhibit our pieces, and then also find the connection with the nature. And we do it in many different locations. One of the places is the Young Theatre Festival that is organized by our university in Bale, Croatia, and it happens every year at the last week of September. So this year is 21st through 27th, where it's a Renaissance town of Bale, which is close to the coast, and then we do workshops. every year. It started as a theater festival just for acting students, and then expanded within the last 2 years. We added the mental health track, and now more and more students from other disciplines are just going into mental health because everybody needs to self-regulate. So this year we'll be doing the class, the art therapy section of it will be with photo art therapy with Mark Wheeler from UK. So he's coming and teaching the class where we'll be going outdoors into both urban and rural environment and taking the images and bringing them and processing them in therapeutic way. And another aspect that's happening in the near future is in 2026, Croatia will be hosting the European Art Therapy Conference in Pula, Croatia. So then all these aspects will be happening at that location as well. And then just last few slides, I just want to show you some of my work, how I combine using my textiles in the nature. And these are some of the images. My background is in textile design. My first degree was from National College of Art and Design in Dublin, doing woven textiles. So these tubes here, they exhibited, I think just above here, from here in the space up there. I used 24 harness loom on a cotton warp and then used boucle weft and an elastic weft to create different kind of textures. And based on how many elastic threads you put, you can create either the ribs or the different patterns in it because it pulls in a different way. So I like the texture of it. And then what I do with those, one of the way I self-regulate is to find the environment where I can put them in and becomes part of something else, not just, me with the space inside the studio. So this is kind of in urban environment, but then also finding a flow of that space. So this is in the city of Osijek by the river, and then I'm using these elements, as you can see, kind of also seeing the driftwood in the same direction, and then following, and then placing them in a different way, finding the elements of nature where they can be incorporated and how they stand out or not stand out and how they, find a place, and then finding literally a safe space for me through, finding the safe space for my textiles. So just thinking about how they become, immerse yourself in the nature and, create that space. And then thinking about the different direction. Are you going with the flow of the water or are you going against the flow of the water? And then putting yourself in these different situations. So, just going in one way or another. And then when you do that, I actually literally put myself in it because those pieces of textiles are extension of me. So creating how I interact with the space and with the textiles, with the media, and how that all comes together. And then also thinking in manipulation of taking individual pieces and finding the individual spots, and then what you take home from that. Do you leave them in that space, or do you, because it's fabric, it's going to disappear if you just leave it rotten there. But then the images, it's something that you can take with you, or, you kind of find a place in the close by or, further out. And then also, what I, when I physically put myself in there, I kind of feel more, more part of it. And then when I take it out, when it's no other background and no steps and no driftwood, then I still take my piece of fabric with me and it feels the story is there. I kind of take it with me. So it's another way of telling the story. So it's not a story cloth of the woven one, but it's it's the textile, it's a piece of fabric that it did tell the story to me in the environment, and then I take it home with me. Thank you. That's it.
You can maybe just stay here for a little discussion. I have a few questions. I know that story plots are like very present techniques, and you mentioned the theme or topic, the day I will never forget. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can give us some other examples or give us ideas how we can, what we can do with our groups.
It's very tricky to try to do something like that without trained art therapists. Mm-hmm. So I would really encourage the conversation to go in direction that it's spreading the awareness about what's possible, but to open up general public to trauma and not have the trained professional is very dangerous. So, it's more We do creating art together is one aspect of it, but then processing trauma is something else. And it's a big conversation that's happening these days in terms of arts and health versus art therapy. And we talk about it as a continuum, that people who are artists, and because there's recently a lot of money in terms of coming from those directions. So, it's more, we try not to go too deep if, there's not a possibility to process it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you were saying that you're working with different cultures, different backgrounds, and I was just wondering how you tackle all those different backgrounds when coming to, let's say, traditions and cultural stories. How you take that into account when you're working with it?
It's really important to have local people help you, because if you don't understand the culture, it's very difficult. Like, I have dual citizenship, Croatian and American citizenship. I've been, living in both continents, so I can understand those. But if I go to Africa, Far East, I don't understand the culture. So let's say when American students come, they come to Croatia for study abroad program, and we bring them to small villages in Croatia, and I'm like, they're doing like a cultural advice of a day, because I'm relating to, they put traditional costumes, they're learning from the women in the villages, they're buying Croatian traditional clothing as the souvenirs and everything, and I think it's the most fun. But those are the cultures that I understand. So if you go into cultures that you don't understand, it's always important, like the examples I was showing, it's more about training the trainers. Then you bring the knowledge of creating the pieces of artwork and everything, but you don't understand the culture, so you have to be appreciative to local cultures.
And as you have a lot of experience, maybe you can share some unexpected emotional reactions of your participants. Like, is there something that also surprised you as a therapist, sometimes when working with?
Well, there's a range of emotion. People will laugh and cry and everything in between. When people start crying, it's really important that the group is already safe place enough to be able to support that. So we try to, when we teach with the students, then it's the supportive environment, because it's already a group. And the way we teach textiles, we teach it in either third or the fourth semester, because it's such a powerful media. We do the drawing and the painting and the sculpture in the first semesters, but we keep the textiles towards the end, because it creates the dynamic of the group when we do something like that. So yeah, I would say that it can be anything from really happy and joyful emotions to very powerful and sad.
And you're mentioning your students a lot. As we mentioned, you're a teacher in Osijek, beautiful town if you ever get to go there. What's the most rewarding working with students when you see they're developing?
When you have one in the audience, I have one sitting right there. Barbara, hi. She just came from Zidar, Croatia. So that's wonderful when they appreciate, and when they travel and they come and they grow and they become strong, and we encourage them to become part of the team. And we have very strong Croatian Art Therapy Association is growing as a very strong association, and we try to do more and more projects together, and that's wonderful when you see them independent and strong. Yeah.
Well then, good luck with everything. At 2026, I heard Pula, right?
Yes, Pula is the one.
So maybe see you there. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. And next we'll hear from Pamela Whitaker. I hope was that a good pronunciation? Okay. So she is an art psychotherapist and lecturer at the Belfast School of Art. Her work focuses on how textile can help us reflect, heal, and build community, but I'm not going to say too much because she's going to present it herself. And I've heard that this is not going to be a typical lecture, it's going to be more like working together, doing something with our hands as well, so practicing. And meanwhile, when she's opening her presentation, maybe I can that she's also deeply involved in the field of creative health, thinking about how culture, nature, and civil society can support the well-being of a person, not just clinics and medicine. And what I love about it, when I read about your work, is your approach and this reminder that it's never too late to mend. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask for help just to open up this PowerPoint, if you don't mind. Thank you so much.
Of course. I think that's it, right?
That is perfection. So everyone, I want to give a chance for us to enact a performance piece together. So I'm just going to highlight aspects of my presentation because we want to leave time for Savneet and then time for questions. So what I thought I would do at the beginning is to just highlight these images of performance artists using textiles. And what I did was I looked at their biographies, their testimonies of their artwork and how they describe their work, and I extracted some key texts that I thought would work with our topic of wellness and textiles. This is Sinead O'Donnell. She's from Belfast. She works with the ideas of identity, borders, transgression, encounters with territory and the territory of actions, honoring the situations between artists and participants, exploring participants as co-artists, exploring commonality and contradictions, moving beyond restrictions that limit extension. Amanda Coogan, Dublin and Belfast. Provocations and ritual, endurance. The essence of an idea communicated through the body, socially sculpted. Using gesture and content to make physical poetry, challenging expected contexts. Elements of the unknown and the unpredictable erupting dynamically in living artworks. The body in place, the bodies as sites of interactions, the body as resistance and resilience. Margie Gillis, Montreal. Instigator, the inner landscape revealing the intimacies of the human psyche. Dance from the inside, literature of the body and poetry meets the art of movement. Authenticity. Erhard Walter, fabric objects, activations, action as art, relational practice, choice, sculpture, architecture, performance, unfixed variations. The art exists as a manifestation, a presence, and an opportunity. Rebecca Horn, Berlin and Paris. Fabric designed to extend and enhance movements. Body transformation, expanding boundaries of the human endeavor. Body fantasies, drawing within space, using projections as body intentions. Helio Otisikia from Rio de Janeiro. Dancing capes, paraganoles, interactive cloth for protest, inviting participation. Interventions in surrounding space. From adversity we live. We live with the unexpected. Embrace the situation. Escape preconceived constraints. Senga Negudi from Chicago. Choreography with found objects, receptivity and improvisation. A composition with the everyday. Creative problem solving. Object performances. A radical opening for the everyday world. Moving the ordinary. Stamina, persistence, altering the shapes of bodies. Jane Cherry, Belfast. Textile poetry, the identity of objects. I have been named a custodian of secrets. I want to leave clues for those who come after. Working closely with acceptance and pain, we all perform. Textile investigations. Performance actions keep me attached to the realness of my existence by helping me to open closed areas, to expose raw, tender experiences that inform and perform. I can watch quietly for a long time. So performance art is a place-based health situation. Place-based health is a feature of creative health, everyday public spaces, in this case in Belfast, offering an opportunity to intervene, to activate, and bring together a collection of people. This is WellBIEN Performance Art Group. And looking at this kinds of spaces as life studios, which activate wellness, connection, curiosity. The significance of performance is that it's unscripted and responds to situational experiencing. It's location of making in the moment. Performance art has a long history of civic practice within the Belfast School of Art, originating with a lecture by Joseph Beuys in 1974. Beuys visited Belfast at the height of the troubles, a 30-year sectarian conflict between Irish nationalists and British loyalists, designating the city into territories of allegiance. Joseph Beuys' message was to pursue dialogue using performative actions to mediate public places of contention through physical improvisation. This is in a city where people are given the message to keep your head down and to say nothing. The art of movement makes a statement. It challenges conventionality and restrictions. It challenged regimented behaviors and composed a public practice of the art, a social sculpture. It's a way of pursuing health in terms of affect generation and vitality, purposeful living, social connectivity. How do you perform a living? WellBIEN Performance Art Group uses the city as they find it. They work in areas of contention. They link people to landscape, architecture, and each other. They create a service to people in need of connection. They invite people to experience art out of bounds amidst life in the making. It's a form of health promotion that allows people to move beyond rumination and to look at challenging normative or divisive behavior in a full range of idiosyncratic, eccentric, and unconventional actions. It encourages nonconformity and experimentation with what we have at hand. As ambassadors for performance art in Northern Ireland, WellBIEN align with our curriculum in the Belfast School of Art, but they look at a duty of care towards public relations. Their physical actions gesture towards reconciliation, interfusion, and unification. So I'm very interested in, as Jasmina introduced, the whole idea of neuroplasticity and new experiences and reshaping how we reorganize habitual ways of being and considering the world with dynamic brains and bodies. And one of the very interesting things about Belfast is that it is a city of festivals. And this is the Being Human Festival, which is taking place in an indoor public park. And a festival is a fantastic site for art therapy, public practice art therapy, meeting expressive circumstances, serendipity, and the unusual. And I wondered if you might take a few minutes with both myself and Jasmina to perhaps explore what this might be like, to live this for a few minutes together. And Jasmina has given you a piece of yellow wool as a gift between two partners. And I hope Jasmina will come to the front with me.
It's under your chairs. Just every second person has a little yarn of yellow.
And we'd like you to work with a partner. So one of you will find the wool and start to unravel it.
And find a partner who doesn't have a wool.
Exactly.
Are you all in couples? Yeah. Could be in three partners?
Oh, yes. Yes, and you can use the second wool if you would like as well. And we use the wool because we can we can follow as our inspiration be beyond the textiles and the wool. So, and we invite you to rise up. Well, you may be aware that we have a theme for this very special Biennale. Do you know what it is? Air. It's air. And we wondered if you might like to begin with air and breath. And Jasmina, would you like to demonstrate?
So you do like this. So you breathe in and you... And if you have the same length, same yard with your partner, you just have to become closer.
And now we're close together and we'll take a step to face each other. And we would like you to invite your partner and for you to express to your partner where you would like them to tie the piece of wool onto a part of your body or to your clothing, as we actually can see in the slide, in the image. So I will ask Jasmina. Jasmina will show me where she would like for me to tie the wool onto her.
On my finger.
And I will ask Jasmina to put it on my wrist. Okay, so tie each other up.
Connect.
Connect.
Each other.
And just take another minute. Just take another minute. So you're both attached, or three of you are attached. Yeah?
Between you is also a little bit, a little bit empty, like yarn, which is not, which is like flowing, floating.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go to the next stage now. If you're not quite finished, your partner can just gesture. We're going to now face each other. There is no more words for the next couple of minutes. And I'm going to invite Jasmina to begin moving. And I'll begin perhaps by mirroring her, but then we'll move together with this string. So without words, to communicate with each other and move together with this string of connection. It can, okay? So without words, yeah? Yeah, without words, okay? With breath, with noticing, with observation. And when you feel like you've come to an end, to a conclusion, we ask you to, again without words, to take your seats. You can remain connected. And to close this experience of a group performance in a public space, I'm going to go through the room and with your partner. So first we'll have Jasmina and Savneet demonstrate. They will rise and they will do one of their actions, or maybe even they make it up in the moment, so that we can all observe. And then I will ask both Jasmina and Savneet to say a word to conclude their collaboration, their duet. Thank you so much. And we will all bow and they will go back to their seats. And then is that okay? And then I'm going to point to you all from now on. So we just go in a kind of a flow. Would that be okay? Just a movement, just one movement. And then the words. Mm-hmm.
Smiling.
Yeah.
Smiling, smiling. Smiling.
Three smilings. Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just one movement. So you rise, one movement, a word and a word. So your word
Is fun.
Mm-hmm. Hard. Okay. Next group. You rise, one movement, and one word and another word.
Tree. Sun. Peace.
Mountain. Mirror. Slow.
Lines. Joy. Yes.
Great. Very. Connection.
Soft.
Soft. And now, if we all rise and to give a bow to each other, thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Maybe we can give a round of applause for this playground. And we're going to skip these questions now and go directly to, last but not least, Savneet Talwar. Come on. And she is an artist and therapist and professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work brings together textile, social justice, and care, using craft not just as a therapy, but as a form of activism. So this is going to be a word of this lecture. Activism? If you can get a little bit of technical support. Is there yeah, right.
You just saw it else. Good. No, not this one. This one.
Maybe I can fill this gap with a little more words about Savneet. Yes. And she developed the idea of slow activism, so I suppose we're going to hear a little bit about that as well. The idea that making something by hand can be a way to resist fast-paced system that often leave people feeling invisible or powerless. And in her work, mending is more than a metaphor. It becomes a practice of survival, connection, and even quiet protest, all stitching together one piece at a time, like sewing. So let's welcome Savneet.
Thank you very much. So thank you everybody for being here. It's a little late and I'll try my best to keep to time. And Jasmina and Pamela, thank you so much for your presentation that sort of put art therapy in context. And then also Pamela for giving us the stopping, which was sort of good to go into the next piece. So I'm taking away a lot of lovely things what both of you have been presenting. I love the idea of the live studio. What a beautiful piece. So my work is really going to focus on public spaces and the therapeutic. I'm very interested in contemporary art and how contemporary art spaces and community art projects, especially social projects, have contributed to our understanding of needs of our community as well as making our voices heard. So in a nutshell, I'll try to cover a lot. I have my presentation written out, so I'm going to speak a little bit, I'm going to read a little bit, and I'll try to keep it as interesting as possible. So Mending for Radical Hope is going to be the project that, the 3-day workshop that's going to happen. And so I keep mending and this idea of radical hope at the center of it all. So cloth holds memory. Everybody's been talking about that here, so grateful to say that again. Increasingly, artists, educators, cultural workers are focusing on mending and repair as a form of storytelling, activism, grief, remembering, and healing, giving the past a place in the present to engage in memory work. So a lot of what I will present today talks about memory and the role of memory. So I've been working with a group of wonderful fiber artists and art therapists, and we're beginning to unpack something called needle methodologies. And it's no brilliant idea. It's something that you've all been speaking about already. So the needle methodology is to identify how cloth and embodied practice of stitching form connections between the past and the present. So centering on the felt experience of sewing, this methodology queries how the needle is a tool to articulate an ethics of care in a world where carelessness reigns. And we are all experiencing that right now. So I argue that to enact a slow and quiet form of activism, creating havoc in upending political and social structures. So I argue that needlework can act as a slow and quiet form of activism, creating havoc in upending political and social structures. So in this way, the needle methodologies is a means to address how the tactile process of stitching, doing, and undoing become forms of care and remembrance. So I'll do a little storytelling. The assignment for my social practice class, my social fabrics class, was to create a protest banner. The banner could be political, it can be anything they wanted. They could go out on a protest if they wanted, or they could just hang it at home that speaks to their own politics. So some students over the years have made banners saying, love one another, be kind, I love girls, read banned books, protect Black women, and for Palestine from the river to the sea. So on Thursday, November 5th, 2024, the day after the election of Donald Trump, my students slowly trickled into class. The atmosphere was very somber. So as I checked in with the students, it was quite apparent that many of my students are very, very upset. So tears began to roll down the cheeks of several students, especially my trans and non-binary students. And many expressed their disappointment with the election results. So it was quite clear that we would do very little work that day in class. So I suggested to students that one of my students, who's right here, Yimi, she was creating a community banner. So I asked the students to engage with her and begin to finish this community banner, because it was a community project and she needed other people to help her out. So very reluctantly, the students sort of pulled chairs and came by and sat down. And this became a real memorable moment for all of my students who, till today, if I see them in the hallway, remember this moment. And so the banner that she was creating was actually about cutting ties with the Crown Foundation. And the Crown Foundation has been instrumental in Chicago in supporting a lot of arts institutions and a lot of academic institutions, and have stopped any kind of protest around Palestine. So this was a really powerful moment for my students. So in retrospect, you saw that soon the banner sort of became a collective space for the students to sort of share their own grief, a space to think what needed mending in the face of hopelessness. And exploring the relationship between mending and communities, Jay Blades argues that mending connects the maker to history, community, and stories for healing. To articulate a theory of needle methodologies, I'm very interested in looking at arts-based social practices and how these practices then bring people together as a way to create counter-narratives. I would share this work of my colleague and my very dear friend, Aram Cifuentes. Aram's work is, Aram is known best for the Protest Banner Lending Library, a project for resistance, love, and care. And as she says, to protest is an act of love. So in 2017, when Donald Trump got elected the first time around, that's when she created the Protest Lending Library. And it was really working with immigrants, people with disabilities, and caregivers who could not always be there to protest. So creating this kind of a banner, she says, is that the most vulnerable people are the ones who are silenced in these moments. So it was a way of giving voice to the people in the community that had really been impacted. So needle methodologies are nothing new. Our mothers, grandmothers, fathers, grandfathers enacted simple acts of repair and mending to bring an ethics of care to everyday life. And sustainability as a result of frugality was the basis of our existence, and that is how I grew up. While the fugue of capitalism has made us forget this embodied knowledge, the retrieval of techniques such as the kanta in India, which is on the left, the piecing together of old saris and cast-off scraps, such a technique as if, taking discarded material and then making something new out of it, is nothing new, and this has been happening for centuries. We also have the shoshiko and the boro, which are Japanese techniques that extend the lives of old clothing. We also have darning and rafugari, a craft to make the visible invisible, that all lend themselves to the needle and its temporality. And of course, we have to ask the question, who was really doing this, right? So I don't have time to get into the material histories of gender and labor and class here, because the people who are really doing it are people who don't have very much. So that said, I wanted to just briefly touch this point about textiles and movement building that has been central to my upbringing and central to a lot of my own education. And I'm sure everybody recognizes Mahatma Gandhi, and he had a movement that eventually brings independence to India, and it's called the Swadeshi movement. So the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi were powerful enough to play a major role in the non-violence revolution that overthrew the British colonial rule in India. The teachings are clearly still of utmost relevance. At the center of this particular movement, which is called Swadeshi, it is also known, which means local self-sufficiency. So historically, we saw spinners and dyers and weavers that were the center of the village. And India was being inundated by machine-made textiles from Lancashire, England. And so it was putting the local weavers out of business. So the movement was really about not purchasing any of these materials, as a result of which the spinning wheel became the central piece to weaving your own cloth. And so as a philosophy, as a everyday practice, it's a really powerful metaphor. And so the spinning wheel becomes sort of a very central emblem to eventually the independence of India and the flag, and how it is represented in the flag. So, and in today's day and time, I also feel that the weaving and the wearing of this homespun cloth has become a mark of distinction for several groups. So it's very interesting to see how it still plays a role in India. So expanding on cloth holding memory in particular, in all that she carried, the journey of Ashley's sack, a black family's keepsake, scholar Tia Miles meticulously traces the history of chattel slavery through a material object. Writing about embroidered sack that tells a story of love and resourcefulness despite slavery and its legacy. So this particular sack is a story of a young woman who was sold at the age of 9, and it's a sack that was given to her by her mother. So decades later, the great-granddaughter is the one who embroiders this little piece because it's been passed down through generations. And so the granddaughter who's actually who embroiders this says, "My great-grandmother Rose, mother of Ashley, gave her this sack when she was sold at the age of 9 in South Carolina. It held a tattered dress, 3 handfuls of pecans, a braid of Rose's hair. Told her it will be filled with my love always. She never saw her again. Ashley is my grandmother." Ruth Middleton, 1921. Stitching Love and Loss, and I'm remembering your work, and I of course cannot remember his name, but this is very similar to something you were talking about, your work. Stitching Love and Loss, Lisa Gale Collins merges textiles and testimony in a compassionate exploration of one quilt and its abundant legacy. So in 1942, Missouri Pettiway, newly suffering the loss of her husband, pieced together a quilt out of his old clothes. Old worn clothes, and stated, "I am going to take his work clothes, shape them into a quilt to remember him, and cover up under it for love." So it's interesting to see how we are looking at objects. We're looking at especially textile objects and the kinds of memories that they convey to us. And what I love with Lisa Gail Collins' work is that she engages in some really interesting, crucial questions. And she asks, what are the languages, practices, and processes of mourning? How is loss expressed and remembered? What are the roles of creativity in grief? And how might a closely crafted material object in its conception, construction, use, and memory serve as the work of grieving a loved one? So we know from historically the names quilt, which is a small project that actually started in a storefront in San Francisco. We now have over 48,000 quilts, 3x6 quilts. This is the display of the quilts at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And so over the years, we have seen the need to record. We have seen the need to name as a way of making sure that our histories of violence are not lost. And so one might ask, what does naming do? Why is it important for us to name? And so for me, naming is an invitation for common citizens to participate in a radical ethics of care and empathy. It asks viewers not to dismiss the systems of discrimination and marginalization, especially for bodies that have been racialized, gendered, and sexualized. But it is an invitation to all of us to begin to think about the histories of racism, about homophobia and xenophobia, and to establish a sense of solidarity and mourning. So the process of naming is an attempt to construct a counter-narrative or a counter-archive in a way to highlight the systemic and institutional discrimination. Here is another project about naming. Several of you might know this. It's called the Madres de Plaza de Mayo. This is a group of Argentinian women whose children had been disappeared in the 1970s during the Dirty Wars. So these women began to embroider the names of their children and began to come to the main square, and it continues till today. And they wear the headscarves of the names of their children. And so the names serve as a visual reminder of the victims, and now it acts to show that these things should not be easily forgotten, because we are forgetting these things easily. So I love this project in the sense that it has been an ongoing project, and this is something that actually speaks to all of us, as that when people don't have the means or whatever they have around them, they find ways to create community and make their voices heard. So while speaking of the whole idea of memory and mourning, I want to share this work of my student Ahmed Al-Mahdi, whose one parent was Palestinian, and he was in my class. And it was really interesting to see where he took the idea of the banner to another level, where he embroidered the names of 6,000 people who had died, Palestinians who had died, but at the Nakba in 1948. And he created these strips, these suede strips. This project has become a little complicated at my institution, because they wanted to actually do another exhibition on institution as empire or university as empire. And his work got censored. They did not want him to put it in. Eventually, it did get in. So I find the work that actually hits the, the emotional component of what it is that we're really trying to push against, the resistance component, as you were speaking about. Mary Evers is a artist in the UK. I don't know, some of you might know her. She is right now in the process of doing a community-based project, and it comes through the needle and the thread again. It's about how do we remember. And so she's documenting the names of the people who have died during this during the war right now, since October 7, 2024. In a similar way, Emile Gisser's work also is a memorial to 400 Palestinian villages that were destroyed at the Nakba in 1948. And so she draws in the work of Walid Khalid, who wrote a book called All That Remains, The Palestinian Villages Occupied and Depopulated by Israel in 1948. And so she's doing this work in 2006, where she creates the tent because so many of the Palestinians ended up in refugee camps, and the tent became a real symbol for them as a space for home. And she invited people from the community to come in and recount their stories. So she got people from all walks of life, lawyers, filmmakers, everybody, a number of people came. But what was really interesting is while most of the people were Palestinian, there were a number of people who were also Israelis who showed up and talked about what it was for them to grow up in these spaces that now were the remains of these villages. So it was it's a very powerful piece, and the tent, I've seen it in several different spaces, and it's incredibly moving. I want to briefly touch on Hannah Brancato's work. She's one of the collaborators for the Monument Quilt. These are 3,000 squares, fabric squares that have messages from survivors of sexual and intimate partner violence. And they are painted, stitched, etc. And she also has been part of this needle methodologies piece. And this project happened between 2013 and 2019. And it was in 2020, at the heels of this comes the Me Too movement in the United States. So it was a real powerful moment in which they got to, put out this whole exhibition on the National Mall, again in Washington, D.C. And so the Monument Quilt mirrors the slow process of the needle as a powerful tool that offers space to slow down, reflect, and contemplate on what is broken and needs repair both personally and systemically. I'm not going to talk about this piece very much, but if people want to know more about the Wandering Uterus Project, it's on my website and you can know more about it. It was really around reproductive justice. And sadly, I report that in 2022, women's right to abortion was taken away by the Supreme Court, although it's in every one of the states gets to decide what reproductive rights for women are available. But this has caused a lot of strife in the United States, especially where women are losing their lives for a basic right of their own to make the choice whether they wish to keep a child or not. So care and repair in a capitalist world. And I wanted to just briefly speak a little bit about something that is going to be part of my workshop. This is, speaking to fast fashion, and I think somebody else had touched base on that. The fast fashion industry operates within what scholars call a one-world world, a system that prioritizes separation, efficiency, and control. This is a paradigm that divorces garments and their origins and also from their magic. It disconnects the maker, it disconnects the wearer from the maker and treats materials as lifeless and easily expendable. So the work that I'm talking about is by Pramila Chaudhary. She's a designer and a researcher specializing in sustainability and textile design, and wanting to bring attention to the overconsumption, globalization, and fast fashion waste that ends up in one of the towns in India, and it ends up all over the global south, but in one town called Sonipat in India. And what she did was she started to think about these very ambitious sculptures from recycled textiles. So she color coordinated, separated a lot of these materials, and began to create these spaces as a way to really highlight what happens when we become disconnected in a hyper-connected world, and how can we work to reframe textiles as a gesture of hope and mending. So what potential do these textile remnants present for us to create a collective space for hope, repair, and grief? So capitalism is interesting as it is all about efficiency, it's all about productivity. It is about time and it is about money, right? While crafting and needle methodologies, I say, teach us to have a relationship with time and have a relationship with ourselves and what we wear and who we are. And so the last project I speak about is my dear colleague and a friend, Rita Grenz. She is, this is called Collective Comfort. And she has been thinking a lot about comfort, especially for people who want to connect to their cultural ancestry. She's of Latvian descent, and these pieces are all about bringing comfort to people. And in the spirit of sharing and in the spirit of also mending. So she began this project during COVID, and it was during a time of social distancing, deep anxiety. Her mother had passed away, and she was beginning to look into her mother's knitting and crafting basement and seeing what was there. And she began to find these beautiful pom-poms her mother had made, and she'd never ever shared that with her. So as she looked through her mother's stash of all of these fibers, she began making them herself too, and began feeling that sense of comfort and that love and the warmth that came to her in relationship to her mother, but also then she felt that she wanted to share this with others. And she creates these incredible installations where people can actually interact with them. So I want to end briefly, oops, okay. There we go. So I want to end in a few minutes about my own work. I end with some of my recent jacquard weavings of the India-Pakistan partition. And as you see, Batwara, this was a series that I started in 2024. Batwara is translated from Hindi, Punjabi, and Urdu as partition or separation. This body of work grapples with inherited past, and I question who is worthy of being a subject of discourse, and what colonial narratives and images continue to define the experiences of the people in the global South through these archives. So while this project can be understood the frame of temporality, for me, weaving is an embodied practice. The archive, in this sense, becomes a space for grief and remembering and mending the colonial incisions and the felt experiences of the archive. So Batwara 2024 was a series of weavings that engaged with popular images that I had seen all my life and now were widely available for me. And Margaret Burke-White is one of the main photographers who has defined the story of partition of 1947. So both my paternal and maternal ancestral homes were lost in Punjab, which is now Pakistan, and my parents' families had to abandon it and come as refugees to India. So this was one of the largest migrations in the history, where over 14,000 people crossed an arbitrary border, and you can see the border is in red. I won't get into the details and the story of the border, but this was in one of the largest history of migration. Over 14 million people crossed an arbitrary border, and it's called the Radcliffe Line, which is drawn by the British cartographer and now I realize lawyer as Cyril Radcliffe. So the forced migration resulted in the deaths of over 2 million people. And this image of the caravan has defined my relationship to how I have thought of what the partition has been all my life. So I began to use various different ways to create a study of this particular image. I've done hand embroidery, some machine embroidery, and then I began taking my mother's old discarded or inherited napkins that she had embroidered herself, and now they were stained and they were creased, and there was nothing I could do with some of these, and there was a way in which I thought, can I take these stains out? And I began to think about history within the idea of the stain and the idea of the fold and the crease. So as you can see in these, and then I also collage more images, and I collage the harrowing images of the overcrowded trains and people on foot walking across this arbitrary border. I'll show you another one. So while weaving the Batwara series, it was like, as I said, it was like, it's like mending these colonial incisions. And so I'm sorry that I can't show you this video, but let me see if I can have the image. So this is the shed, and I'm talking about the possibilities of the shed and how, where, and how we think about where grief lies and where transformation helps us. I'm not able to play the video. However, the warp threads, in order for the image to develop, one set will will be raised and another will come down, and then the shuttle passes back and forth through that. And those who are weavers probably know the idea behind that. But I think about this as the possibilities of the shed as the idea of making, that how making is such an extraordinary process for me for enacting an ethics of love in a world where I said earlier carelessness has reigned. And it erased histories of violence and genocide. So this repetition, the back and forth, the stitching over and over, the repeated throwing the shuttle in the jacquard loom, does become a process of remembering and a place where, for me, history unfolds. So the shed in this sense becomes a methodology of inquiry and also the afterlife of the archive. And so to make the story even more interesting is that in last November, I was preparing to give a paper at the American Studies Conference in Baltimore. And I was going to use my Batwara series as a way to talk about some of my ideas around craft. And so I found during this process that the image that had been so embedded in my mind had actually been an image that had been staged. So the writings of Lee Ettington, who was the reporter that was on assignment with Margaret Burke White, writes at length about the ways in which this caravan was actually stopped, and for a couple of hours, till the time Margaret Burke White got the right image that she wanted. And so you saw, this is the contact sheet, and you see here, this is the image she wanted. So she actually stayed. So anyway, we can all talk about photography and visual culture and the impact of that and how it creates memories. So I decided when I was at Lotta Zero, I did 2 weavings. This was one of them, and then the other one is the one hanging here, of finding a different perspective to borders and boundaries. And here is the weaving that I did there. So I'm going to end here, and I just want to end with some words from Susan Raffo. Susan Raffo is an author of a book called Liberated to the Bone, and she calls the violence and genocide that resulted in land theft and separation from homelands across the world as the original colonial wound. And she says that the wounding for people has happened on how colonization separated them from those spaces. And a lot of this thinking has come to me towards more recently, especially in relationship to Palestine. And so the 2 other authors that I love is Kara Page and Erica Woodland. And one of the things they say is that we need to interrupt trauma, right? And as somebody else said, I think you talked about this idea of self-regulation, which is true, but we have to interrupt trauma to claim the spiritual and the cultural understanding of how intergenerational trauma has really impacted Black, Brown, Indigenous, and communities of color. So they pose 3 questions to us. What must be remembered? What must be repaired? What needs to be reconnected? So for me, through the jacquard weavings, I bring together craft languages and archives as an act of repair and mending. So the slow emergence of the image in the weaving process represents the silence, giving way to stories and images that have been passed down through generations. And so I will end here.
So now we'll surely, slowly move to this discussion part of this session. So I'll ask also Pamela and Jasmina to join us. And in between, we're gonna just chit-chat a little bit whenever they're moving. Also, I think that the banner, this idea of doing that with students, in times of ambivalent protests and everything, and uncertainty, I think it's brilliant. Yes, I must say.
But it gets to the heart.
Yeah. And when you voted to protest as an act of love, what is that working with textiles stands for? Act of love as well?
Yeah, I think we come here because we care, right? So I think that for me, any form of work that we're doing as a way of transforming for ourselves as well as for others, right? It's a form of communication. So I think of it as an ethics of care. As something that transforms us, but also gives us the voice to engage with others.
And maybe that can be also a question already for all of you, but specifically for you, when you were talking about forgetfulness, how we easily forget things, and that's why I think activism is really important. But what is the ethical challenge, let's say, arising when textile art crosses from just personal therapy to this public activism going to public spaces? What is...
So most of the work I've shown you is not done within a therapeutic context, right? It's always done within when we talk about social fabrics, it's a very specific class that is available for all my studio students. I do some of the band making also with art therapy students in a class called Stitch by Stitch. So the ethical piece for me is like, I think it's very important for us as individuals and as students to really realize what our political skills. Where I feel that harm has happened is when I have seen the right thing sort of take this rhetoric as a way to continue those marches, right? So I think it's how language is structured, right? When we talk about being pro-life. Right? So we think about the ways in which language gets structured in these contexts that can continue to cause people harm. So I don't know if I'm making sense there. I'm letting others.
Yeah, and also that's open floor for you as well. So if you have any questions, maybe just raise your hands just quite high so we can see you, because we're going to be also in a discussion. And yeah, maybe for the beginning, I have one question as someone not coming from the textile community. How do you encourage people, all three of you, people who feel like artistically maybe unskilled or like not very familiar with material and techniques, how do you encourage them to get in touch with textile and art?
That's such an interesting one.
Okay. See, this is what I'm doing. I'm playing with it. So if you just ask people to play and touch, I think, nobody's scared to touch something. So like teaching very basic techniques, just using your hands instead of, with needles or something, this was just crochet now with my fingers. So just kind of making it playful, like what we were doing, like playing with it. I think it's very easy then to do that. But it's very surprising how many people actually are comfortable with textiles, especially women. With men, it's a little bit more difficult. They think that textile is very feminine, and in general, they will go for metal and pliers and wood. And if I work with, let's say, PTSD veterans, it's very hard to get them to work with anything with something that's soft. But and then we don't push it. We make it, available for them to choose whatever the media they would like to have. But I think the play is the key word. Just even instead of trying to force the creation, to make it as a playful and focus on the process, not on the result. And which is part of art therapy. It's always about the process, and we don't care what's going to be at the end.
Because in my mind, I feel like I would be very, nervous when I have to comprehend also my thoughts and my hands and materials, and it seems like a lot, but you seem, everything seems so easy when you show it in language.
Well, sometimes with fabrics we don't sew right away. We just cut images from the fabric, like using a collage paper, and then we just gluing it with a press with the iron, because you can just put it together. You can just collage it. You can put things together without actually using the textile techniques. And then if people are interested, you teach them, whatever the skill they want to learn, and you just teach them very basic something. We usually have the crochet needles and knitting needles and threads and everything there available. But some people will just go for very basic fabric and just lay it and cover each other and use it as an applique rather than something. And some people will actually be challenged to create something three-dimensional. So,
and not everybody wants to work with textiles. So I want to say that, I think that the classes are electives, and if people want to come and they're interested. I mean, I'm in an institution that has the state-of-the-art equipment, from the best embroidery machines to the looms and heat presses and everything. So the process the process through which my studio students create is very different when I teach in the fine arts department. But then also within my art therapy students, everybody wants to do textiles. But it resonates with a lot of people. You know, it's something that's become more and more something the students are engaging with more and more. And I'm always surprised, right? Like there was a time we didn't even consider textiles as an important part of what we did in art therapy. It was not even on a continuum. So I think when we look at the four mothers or whatever it is of art therapy, for them, getting in touch with the unconscious and bringing those images out were very, very, that's what art therapy was. And so there's a lot of debate in how we are defining art therapy, what art therapy needs to be. And that's great because it's an ongoing debate.
And when you're talking like about a rebirth of textile in a way, and you all showed some brilliant things that you're doing, but how do you envision role of textile in future? Like, where is the limit? Is sky's the limit here?
Yes. I mean, we're all wearing textiles, and I'm really interested in how we wear, textile, and how we move with cloth, and how we live with cloth, because we're surrounded by cloth in our homes. So, I mean, sheets, tablecloth, it's in contact with our identity and our skin. And so for me, it's that awareness of that everyday interaction with textiles. So you're interacting with it all the time. You're making selections based on comfort and care. And, we make transactions with textiles as well in terms of our intimacy of our home environments, if that's helpful at all. So we're all working with textiles.
It's just part of our everyday life, right? So in some contexts of the other textiles, it's just always there for us.
Is maybe on that point any questions from the audience?
I do have a question. So yeah, it's been 2 years ago that I was at the WellBIEN festival, and up until then I didn't even expect what could I see. All the creation made out of textile, and obviously making it a very interesting art. And so this year I'm part of the group that is making this thing. I'm technical support here, and I cannot help myself but noticing that. So this is my feeling. Okay, at least this festival, maybe not in general textile art, but this festival so far has some kind of a female note on it. So what I mean by that is that even yesterday at the opening, it was called that it's a female art. Just earlier when we were listening to the lovely poem by Jasmina, the female pronouns were used, right? I mean, it's obvious, just 2 men here, 3, I get it, but do you think that helps the whole thing? Do you think that in general, I myself coming from musical art, I'm a musician, and I was never thinking about my art through a gender lens, because the history of music just shows too many examples that it can be done by both genders. And so do you think that you're making a favor to the whole art by pasting some of that note to it? Or do you think that we could do more that males would feel included as well? Because honestly, it's a little bit hard sometimes to feel equal in that way. And,
well, that's nice that you feel that right now. That's been an age-old problem, right? About equity.
Sorry that I feel.
No, I said it's interesting of what you're talking about is about inclusion, right? So one of the ways in which textile art has always remained separated, even in the larger contemporary art movements, has been by saying it's the domestic arts. It's not serious work. It's women's work. So I think from a gendered lens, textiles have been marginalized all of these years, right? It's only now we're seeing sort of a renaissance in textile art. I'm really surprised the central space is taking. But that's not to say that there aren't a lot of, that there are male artists in there as well. So I'll give you an example. Anytime a man starts to knit, all of a sudden it becomes news, while women have been knitting all this while. So what I'm speaking again about is about claiming our spaces without having to be apologetic. And I'm all for inclusion, don't get me wrong. I welcome people in every part, every sphere. But at the same time, I think it's an interesting question coming back about textile arts as a gendered form of art. And I do not criticize. I feel like this has been my way of really connecting with my own ancestry, right? Through my relationships to my mothers and my grandmothers that have been so incredible. And that's what connects my students to their work. Once they begin to understand their own sense of marginalization, their own sense of subordination within society, that's when they start to become political. So for me, this has been a way of actually politicizing my students and for them to understand what their political identities are.
Okay, so so to broaden the question, maybe, do you think that any art form should be politicized or should be put into the box of the into this identity politics? Because eventually we come to the point that we're all marginalized, like all of us, in a way. Like, this thing, okay, so there's also culture, right? Europeans are never going to talk about slavery the same way that Americans do. In America, only blacks were slaves. Here, whites were slaves as well. So here we have two big differences immediately. And I just think that in a way that art should be transcending people from the everyday dust, let's say. It's my opinion that it doesn't do much help to the art form itself to be used as some sort of, making political messages. Don't get me wrong, of course, I get it, but it's my feeling that it's kind of became a fashion.
Then you have to question what the role of the artist is. We all might have very different ideas of what my role as an artist or what my role as a human being is in society. So because my lens is from a social justice lens, that's very central to my work. But I'll stop and others respond.
I would like to connect to your gender role position because especially in textiles, men have played huge roles in weaving communities. If you look back into all the men weavers, spinners, all over UK, all the Slavic countries. My grandfather was, weaving on loom, setting up the threads. So it's not we only talk maybe about crocheting and knitting being something that the women did, but there's all kind of, I work in theater industry, all the performances are done by male, constructing people, doing the costumes and all of that. So there's a huge amount of, men in industry, in every aspect of it, in the past and in the present. And I think we're seeing it in fine arts as well. But it's the question is how in the fine arts we talked about feminine role being very small and why there are no big, great visual artists women. And then we talk about the possibilities of training and everything. And because the textile was the medium, it's something that was trained at home. They need to go to the academia and they need to take big classes from big teachers in the past. It's something that women feel more empowered by it. So I think that the men don't necessarily take it as a position of power, and women do. So don't steal it from us. It's one of the places where women do feel empowered. So I appreciate the argument, but it's one of those places where we feel like there's something for women that can be stronger.
And cannot be shared.
No, I think everybody's open to share, just kind of.
There's nothing to steal, is it?
Yeah.
What do we call them, anyways?
Maybe I can just connect with what Jasmina and I were talking. We made a radio show about therapeutic part of this, and maybe it's going a little bit away from art, but women do feel safe when they're only being around us. Only then can the discussion happen. Only then maybe women can be without, in some cultures, without the clothes over their faces or heads, like being very much in a moment connected with other women. And yeah, maybe able to speak, because in front of men in some cultures you cannot really express your emotions and feelings and concerns. So maybe that can also be
very
a
valid
part
point when it comes in terms of therapy. When I do, let's say, in teenage delinquent home, when I work with the groups of girls who are like 16 to 18 versus boys, I do group therapy with girls. It works wonderful. They want to be together. They want to share the stories. If you work with guys, teenage boys, you cannot achieve anything because they're all alpha males. They want to present a strong front. You cannot be emotional. You cannot be showing emotions. You have to be powerful. You have to, bring the knife to the table. You have to bring the gun. You have to be smoking cigarettes and everything. As soon as you take individual sessions with each one of the guys, they're opening up. They want to talk about problems. They want to talk about emotions and everything. So, in terms of sharing and textile being a media that brings people together and wants to do things together, that's something that doesn't resonate with male psyche in that way, because they want to present a strong front. And if you do the metal work, if you do the woodwork, then it's strong front. It doesn't show the weakness. It doesn't show being vulnerable. And what you're saying, it's about women in the circle and sharing that. So it could be about the soft media and just the psychology of the group in terms of gender roles.
There could be an entire conference on this topic. So.
Yeah. That's a good one.
therapy.
That's a very
part of
good
gender, so I could understand which.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other question?
Yeah.
Of course.
I just want to say I'm really glad that you shared that.
Thank you. I respect that. Thank you very much.
We see you.
Don't give me that.
Maybe a question I wanted to ask Pamela after your presentation, because we saw all those aesthetic images and photos of art, installations, if you will, and I was wondering how you think about this unpredictability of things, when you're on one hand want to present art, and on the other side there is therapeutic part of these things, and maybe sometimes that's not really combined, because sometimes things are just like not pleasing to an eye after you share your emotions. But how do you find the balance between those things?
Sorry, say it again.
Like just this aesthetic part and unpredictability part, like the one.
Improvisation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's the idea of people extending into more social spaces and taking up positions or having rights to civic space. And this is the foundation of creative health, is that people have the right to be received, to be acknowledged, to participate in cultural life, rather than feel that they don't have a place within it's a festival or community centre or leisure centre or museum or arts facility of some sort or another. And that can even happen in community contexts. So I'm very interested in creative hospitality and ecologies of care and how we redesign spatial practices where we're out there more, which gives voice, but I'm not into the stopping at all. Whenever I hear slow and stopping, for me it feels like repression as a woman. So I'm really into movement and taking in more hands and accompanying people into more places. So they're extending their lifescape into these life studios, as I was mentioning.
Mm-hmm. And maybe taking this opportunity of having all three of you here in the same space that's probably haven't happened before. Let's imagine now, let's close our eyes, what could be your main project, like all ideas going together? What could you do? Yeah. Do you have any ideas? What can you talk before our
What couldn't we do?
Right.
Yeah.
There are some sparks I can see.
Yeah, I'd like to sleep on that. Maybe.
We're coming back to that tomorrow.
We are, absolutely.
Perfect.
I'm jealous seeing the technology that you have Jacquard looms because I'm a weaver. It's one of my first loves. So yeah, it's wonderful to be able to use technology as well, because when we think about the textiles, we only think about just the handmade things, but because it's all technology today in terms of the media and the phones and images and everything, and the wonderful way that you translated all the images that once you figure out it was staged.
Yes.
So what do I do with that realization, and then you translate it into textile as well, and that was great.
Yeah, that space of it becoming a meditative process of really rethinking the role of visual culture in our lives and archives. So my next project actually is, I just wrote a grant to go to the archives. So Margaret Burton White's archives at Syracuse University. So I just wrote I don't know if I'll get it, but it's a grant for craft and archives from the Center for Craft in America. So we'll see. This might just keep continuing, and how I interpret this archives.
Pull it together, right?
Yes.
Oh, 26.
So you can sleep a lot on that. So many nights to 2026. And yeah, perfect. Any other questions, maybe?
I think so now.
Yeah. We can maybe then wrap it up a little bit. Yeah. Just before we end, give me just one more minute to add something that my obligations are, let's say. So this event is part of the Culture for Mental Health program, supported by the Ministry of Public Administration of the Republic of Slovenia. So free admissions for 15 artists exploring the intersection of art, culture, and fields like health, social care, and education has been made possible by the Culture and Health platform and the Culture for Mental Health project. In the particular through the partnership with Asociația, whose activities are co-funded by the European Union and the Ministry of Public Administration. And by that, we're also very thankful for their support, for you, that you came, for all the beautiful presenters here. And yeah, we're ending our discussion here. Take good care, and hopefully we see you very soon.
Thank you.